This video will contain major spoilers for Grandia 2. Now, it's no secret that I absolutely adore Grandia 2. I love its battle system, its soundtrack, and the vibrant colour scheme which gives the game a light-hearted tone. But the best part about Grandia 2 to me is the story. Now, I have explained why the story of Grandia 2 is so great in my review, but for the sake of spoilers, I didn't really delve deep into the context of the actual story. Now, I want to make it clear that I am not really all that big into narrative-driven media. While I don't mind narrative experience, and I'm always open to experiencing a story, narrative isn't the primary reason why I'm into JRPGs. If it was, then I would probably be a huge anime fan right now, but I personally prefer to build my own experience as opposed to having an experience laid out before me. Hence why I'm a huge fan of games like Mountain Blade. When it comes to narrative in games, there are two games that really stand out to me. Those two games are Warcraft 3 and Grandia 2. Now, in one of my theory crafting videos, I talk about how I personally consider Warcraft 3's story to be better than Grandia 2's story. Despite this, however, I mentioned how Grandia 2's story befits its medium better than Warcraft 3's story does, and for good reason. Grandia 2's story may be simple, but it is extremely deep and impactful underneath all the facade. This is what makes Grandia 2 the perfect video game story to me. With all that aside, however, what actually is Grandia 2's story? Is it a story about a young lad embarking on a long, arduous escort mission, aka Resident Evil 4? Or is it a story of a young lass whose circumstances have caused her to abandon the confines of her isolated life out in the sticks to discover a completely different world, aka Fallout 3. While other games tend to focus on either one of these tropes, there are few games that manage to tackle both at the same time, and Grandia 2 is arguably the best execution of these tropes, and for good reason. The characters and the dialogue are so fucking good. Ryudo isn't just a run-of-the-mill edgy anti-hero like many would be led to believe. His dialogue is some of the best dialogue in a video game ever, and this distinguishes him from other characters that share his archetype. Elena is also very different from most sheltered characters, as she has an alter ego in the form of Millennia. Now, who is Millennia, you ask? Well, she's not exactly a timid girl, let's put it that way. Millennia is as outgoing as you're going to get, to the point that she's overbearing and is in your face all the time, demanding your attention constantly like a neglected child. Elena's primary ego, however, is that of a caring, selfless and naive girl who is constantly trying to better herself for the sake of others, despite her own incompetence preventing her actions from having any real impact on anyone. Both Millennia and Elena have one thing in common though. While they both have completely different perspectives on life, they are equally as pushy towards others, particularly Ryudo, who by comparison has a pretty clear picture on what life really is, due to circumstances forcing him to grow up and see reality. Therefore, Ryudo is unable to conform to Elena and Millennia's delusions, as he has enough worldly knowledge to realise that neither of their philosophies on life are practical. Despite this, however, Ryudo struggles to come to terms with reality, and therefore he is stuck as a borderline destitute that can barely make ends meet, forced to risk his own life in order to eat. This is a harsh contrast to that of Elena, who has everything handed to her on a platter, but still feels insecure about her inadequacy and feels like a burden on everyone, due to her inability to help people. Ryudo, on the other hand, clearly has the ability to help others, but it's hard enough for him to look after himself, let alone anyone else, as unlike Elena, he doesn't have parents, nor does he have a house. He is a lone wanderer, forced to survive in the harsh wastelands of reality with only his talking bird companion to accompany him in this arduous ordeal. Both characters are quickly faced with what would be their toughest challenge yet. Ryudo has to not only look after himself, but also Elena, which adds extra baggage to his burdens, whilst Elena is forced to step out of her world of prosperity and sanctuary into the harsh reality of danger and deprivation. This is where Grandia 2's story starts, and if you think about it, this is the moment many of us dread in our lives. If you can relate to Elena, Ryudo, or both, chances are you are in your 20s or early 30s, possibly older, and have found yourself in a powerless situation at one point in your life that has crippled you mentally to the point that you begin to loathe yourself. Unlike Elena, however, Ryudo not only suffers from self-loathing, he also has grown to loathe society in general. This is what makes Ryudo the protagonist of the game, and not a side character like Elena, because there is a lot more turbulence going on deep inside Ryudo's character. Despite this, however, for most of the game, Ryudo is often the one who is right. Every time the party visits a town or village, Ryudo is tasked with performing some errand or request. Usually, this involves an issue which is deeply rooted in each area, and these issues tend to be synonymous with that of the 7 deadly sins, which take the form of a monster known as the Piece of Valmar. In Grandia 2, Valmar is perceived as the source of all evil in the world. Therefore, Valmar's parts represent the 7 deadly sins. The wings represent lust, the tongue represents gluttony, the eyes represent envy, the claws represent greed, the horns represent pride, the body represents sloth, and the heart represents wrath. It is through overcoming these evils that both Ryudo and Elena are able to grow as characters, as it completely changes their perspectives on the world, and makes Ryudo more acceptive towards society. Despite this, however, Elena continues her firm belief in Granis, and thus while her perspective changes slightly, she stubbornly continues to believe in her delusional ways, and continues to dig deeper towards what would lead to her inevitable despair. Many would consider the corruption within the Church of Granis to be the game's biggest plot twist. Sure, if you were young at the time, or hadn't played many JRPGs at the time, then it is possible that you would have believed it to be a major twist. However, the corruption of the Church is conspicuous to the player the moment that they encounter Celine. Celine operates as an inquisitor of the Church, and her job is to eliminate evil by any means necessary, even if it means murdering everybody who stands in her way to get there. She is clearly evil, and Ryudo is the first to admonish her, but Elena, despite seeing the moral implications of Celine's actions, refuses to accept the fact that Celine's actions are wrong, and while she feels somewhat uneasy about the idea of Celine murdering a child to cleanse the evil within, she still believes that what Celine is doing is right, because Celine is a member of the Church. Therefore, she sees Ira's murder as a necessity for everybody's sake. Ryudo, on the other hand, is infuriated by Celine's actions, and ends up being the sole defendant of the child after her mother was reluctantly driven to accept her daughter's death as being the best thing for everyone. So while the Church is finally revealed to be corrupt, Ryudo's virtues begin to show. This is when the player starts to realise that Grandia 2 isn't your everyday story about good versus evil. This is a story about humanity and how our sins and virtues are what build the world around us. The point is that the Church of Granis and the pieces of Valmar are not really all that important in the grand scheme of things. They are merely the perception of good and evil given form. But deep down, there is no physical embodiment of good or evil. Well, not on this plane of existence at least. Make no mistake, Grandia 2 is not atheist propaganda. It isn't written with the intent of eliminating your beliefs. Even if you are a believer of some kind of supernatural entity, you can still adhere to the principles that are explored in Grandia 2. While Ryudo himself is an atheist, he is still forced to contend with his own challenges just as much as Elena and adjust his perspective on life. Heck, even though she is fully aware of the truth, Elena's actions do not change. She continues to do her best to help others, just not for a deity, rather for her own self-betterment, and the ability to impact other people's lives in a positive way. Despite this, however, she continues to assert an authoritarian stance on how people should live their lives. It should be noted that Millennia's perspective changes slightly also, though this is far less pronounced than that of Elena and Ryudo, mainly because of who Millennia represents. Millennia is for all intents and purposes the personification of a child. She is the yin to Rome's yang, Rome being the altruistic child who goes through a brief character arc. Much like Elena, however, while she does become more considerate towards others and gets a better understanding on what is right and what is wrong, her overall stance on life remains libertarian by the end of the game. Interestingly enough, when asked which of the two girls is right, Ryudo professes neither of their stances on life. This essentially resolves the whole love triangle conundrum, despite what many people are led to believe, as Ryudo is incapable of settling with anyone who does not share his values, and this is why Ryudo is not seen around either Elena or Millennia at the end of the game. He instead chooses his own path, a path dedicated to the people, no matter what their political stance may be. This is a strong principle that I believe not enough people comply with, especially nowadays, where people bitch and complain at each other for having different political stances, and using that as a means of expressing spite. Grandia 2 shows that being spiteful towards one another can bring no good, and that only by accepting others and working to better each other can make great things happen. Throughout the game you encounter various NPCs who either panic, point fingers at one another, or choose not to act. Everyone in the world of Grandia 2 feels the need to rely on others, yet few are willing to actually offer aid to others, aside from those who are brainwashed by the Church of Granus into doing so, believing that their good deeds will one day be rewarded by a supernatural entity, who they believe will protect and nurture them forever. The biggest revelation of this message occurs not so long after the events of Garlan are wrapped up, during the scene where the village elder and Ryudo's friend Gata are conversing about Melphis' death. The village elder states that it is troubling to take pleasure in the death of another, yet he does not deny that he does. With Melphis gone, the village of Garlan no longer has to fear him, as he will never trouble them anymore. He then follows up by saying that Melphis' death will bring the village back to its former glory. Gata, however, states that he is wrong, and that Melphis' death changes nothing, claiming that their reliance on Melphis was what led to their downfall in the first place, and after Melphis went mad with power, the people lost faith, as they did not have faith in themselves beforehand, only Melphis. Now to the villagers' credit, Melphis was a bit of an anomaly, as his talent with the sword may have been the reasoning for this, as his capabilities outshone everyone else's, to the point that they may have developed an inferiority complex. Put simply, Melphis' existence disturbed the harmony of Garlan, and because Melphis chose willingly to pursue a path of power for the sake of pride, he is equally, if not more guilty of evils. Nevertheless, this shows that just because we as humans perceive evils based on actions such as murder for their blatant nature, we only judge what we see, and because most evils exist subconsciously, we are unable to see them until they manifest. What we can take from this is that even if we do not commit evil acts, our subconscious evils can still affect the state of the world. The villagers grew too complacent due to Melphis, and that complacency was their biggest sin. So even though Melphis represents pride, the people of Garlan represent sloth. Even though they aren't a piece of Valmar, they still commit the evil. I still believe that the body of Valmar represents the sloth evil, as unlike all the other parts of Valmar, it remains dormant until summoned by Selene. So as we can see, Grandia 2 is more than just a bunch of well-written characters with flamboyant dialogue. It's a story that presents itself as a facade depicting that of a light-hearted comedy, but deep down inside there is a hidden message that is relevant to all of us. But what makes this game so great for young adults in particular is that as adults we are able to discern and appreciate the themes hidden underneath the facade, while still being presented with the childlike charm that we were brought up with as kids. We all watched cartoons back in the day, and they were often crazy, over the top and kinda silly. Grandia 2's story is like a Saturday morning cartoon for grown-ups. That's not to say that a child wouldn't be able to enjoy Grandia 2, but they wouldn't be able to appreciate it in the same way as an adult would. Older people would also find some enjoyment in Grandia 2 as well, though they may not feel the same connection to the characters than that of a young adult. I do find it quite odd that Ryudo and Elena are both aged 17, as their characters definitely do not act their age, but maybe that's the point. These characters were forced to mature at an early age, and making them teenagers kinda mixes things up a bit as it's abnormal. It does make for some pretty awkward moments though, particularly where the whole love triangle is concerned, as the characters clearly handle the whole concept of relationships in a childish way, but when you see it for what it really is, it all makes sense. The whole thing is basically a throwback to the teenage years, something all young adults are familiar with at this point. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is up to you to decide. Just as long as you understand that Grandia 2 is not built on romance, it is built on themes related to humanity. This love triangle dynamic is merely a symbol that represents the acceptance of political differences and unity among people. Don't you see that Grandia 2 is calling you all out? Yeah, I'm talking about all you people who bitch incessantly about politics over the internet. By doing so, you're only polluting the internet with hate. How about instead of relying on Trump or Bernie to solve all your problems, why don't you work on solving them yourself and stop bitching about which one of them should win? I get that they make the rules and all, but there's always a way to live within those rules, and you should find that way to live instead of expecting all the rules to be built around you. With all that social commentary aside, it should be noted that Grandia 2's ending is not all sunshine and rainbows. While the game clearly acknowledges the fact that humanity has triumphed over Valmar, it follows up by acknowledging that the world is still in a mess, and that the suffering will continue. While both Elena and Millennia present their political stances, neither of them are practical, and if they were, people wouldn't argue amongst each other on what political stance is better, because if one political stance is perfect, why argue? It's because they aren't perfect that people are always in conflict. Eventually, people will adopt yet another flawed system which will make some people happy and others miserable, and the same thing will happen all over again. It's pretty much unavoidable. So ultimately, no matter what we do, nothing is going to change. Heck, I doubt bitching about the state of the industry is going to change much. People will still buy tripe, but at the end of the day, I enjoy being cynical because sometimes having a good moan can be so damn satisfying, and it doesn't hurt anyone in the process. At least I'm acknowledging that there's a problem, even if the problem doesn't go away. Ryudo is a cynical prick, but that's what I like about him. I can totally relate to how he feels about society and the state of the world, but at the end of the day, Grandia 2 is a fantasy story, so I'll continue being a cynical prick because we're all a bunch of pricks deep down, just not all of us want to admit it. It's part of being a human being. All that matters is that we accept each other for both our virtues and our evils and try to survive in the wasteland of life together, rather than being a bunch of whiny babies who attack each other because we don't get our way. Being an adult is about doing what you can to make the world a better place for future generations. That doesn't mean that we should make the world perfect, because even if we did, the next generation will probably mess it back up again due to becoming too complacent. Thanks for watching, guys, but before you go, I want to give a shout out to High Level Reviews for giving me the idea of doing this video, as he does a lot of videos like this, and I strongly recommend checking him out if you enjoyed this video because he does a lot of videos of the same ilk. He also did a Grandia 2 review which was really good, so I highly recommend checking that out.